the summer of 1949, Tadd and Miles returned to the United States, buoyed by their success in Europe. And they started forming and rehearsing a big band. This according to reports in the English publication Melody Maker and also Downbeat magazine. However, this band never gets off the ground. It seems that the excitement around modern jazz is waning as we move into 1950s, and jazz musicians are increasingly looking to R&B bands and floor shows for work, as we shall see. Nevertheless, around this time, Tadd writes arrangements for Pearl Bailey and Artie Shaw, who records a couple of his charts. He also submits some to Stan Kenton for his artistry and rhythm project. Unfortunately, these are deemed too difficult for the available rehearsal time and are not used. He had already developed his addiction to heroin at this time, and he retreats to Cleveland, where, among other things, he runs the jam sessions here at Lindsay's, which is a notable jazz club in Cleveland for many, many years. And he works in the family restaurant that his brother started for his mother, called Dameron's Hut. He cooks. And he goes out on the road with his buddy from the neighborhood, Clarence Bull Moose Jackson. He writes all of Clarence Jackson's ballad arrangements. It's really clear by listening to them, including Bull Moose's first big hit, I Really, Really Do Love You. I think it was called 1947. It's what put Bull Moose on the map. And while on the road with Bull Moose Jackson, Benny Golson, who was another one who, like Horace Silver, was really deeply influenced and taken with those small band recordings of the late 40s. Benny Golson has taken the gig with Bull Moose Jackson, another one of these young jazz musicians that can't play jazz, so we go out and play R&B, you know. And there's Tadd Dameron at the piano chair, which was really a wonderful thing for him, and was the beginning of their friendship. And also in that band, Tadd met Johnny Coles and Jimmy Merritt and Joseph Jones, whom he named Philly Joe. Okay? Tadd gave Philly Joe the nickname Philly Joe Jones. And all of that leads up to 1953 when he surfaces again, records this record for Prestige. It's a 10-incher. Has very interesting compositions, a nonette with Idris Suleiman and the young Clifford Brown, kind of featured Clifford Brown on this. Although Clifford had already recorded a couple of weeks earlier with Lou Donaldson, it's this album, I understand it, where Clifford's playing caught people's ears. And he takes this band to Atlantic City, where he's been engaged and has written a whole score for a floor show that's going to last the summer. Benny, Gigi Grice, Johnny Coles, Cecil Payne, Philly Joe, they're on this. Jimmy Merritt plays in that band. Unfortunately, after a few weeks of playing there, there was a big bust, a drug bust at the Paradise Club. One of the great tap dancers told me that it was really the dancers that they were busting. Tadd got word of that and got out and back to New York just in time to escape being arrested. He found a sub for himself and he went back to New York, didn't stay there too long, and went back to Cleveland. Apparently, the arranging business was in a lull at that point in '53, according to Quincy Jones' biography. Anyhow, he goes back to Cleveland, and as he says, I did nothing. Well, no, he did. He and his buddy Willie Face Smith put together a rehearsal octet and wrote a lot of charts for trumpet, trombone, 3 saxes, 3 rhythm. But he also apparently went back to work in one of the factories. The industry was still pretty healthy in Cleveland at that time, because Charlie Mariano and Sam Noto ran into him in a bar in '55, and they had a conversation, and he's still in his coveralls from his job in the factory. Towards the end of '55, going into '56, Dizzy first says, "Tadd, you got to come back to New York." Then Max Roach says, "Tadd, I need somebody to help me drive the car back to New York." The Roach Brown band had come to town. He comes back, he takes part in the recording of At Basin Street, one of the really important early hard bop recordings. And in this sense, we have to look, and others have made this observation, that Tadd is really one of the key figures already in the 1940s, pointing his way to what we call hard bop in the 50s and 60s. And he's involved in that session, brings a couple of tunes, helps write some of the charts. Meanwhile, his writing for octet of trumpet, trombone, 3 saxes, piano, bass, and drums finds expression in another recording that features a work presenting his interest in long-form composition. In March, he records Fontainebleau, scored for octet, in which he uses a compositional method quite different from the song form approach of his better-known work. He has used this approach before in 2 compositions for Dizzy Gillespie, which unfortunately were never recorded commercially. Later in March, Dameron and Jimmy Mundy record arrangements for an album by Carmen McRae, and Tadd seems to be reestablishing himself on the New York scene. Unfortunately, on April 11th, Tadd is arrested for possession of a significant amount of heroin. He goes to trial later in the summer. He's put on probation, so he's still active. And shortly after that, he makes this recording, Mating Call, which contains 2 of his best-known tunes, On a Misty Night and Soul Train. But the other significance is who gets the publishing here. Up until this time, almost all of his publishing has gone with the reputable firm Bregman, Vocal, and Kahn. Now, all of these pieces on here are claimed by Car Baby, which belongs to Richard Carpenter. An understanding of Dameron's and Carpenter's relationship is made difficult by the passage of time and the lack of any written record other than the copyright documents. What we do know is the relationship between the two was at times contentious and likely never cordial. Further, that Carpenter attempted to assume control of all of Dameron's catalog. Despite the arrest and trial and the published news of these events, I was unable to find any official record of Tadd's first arrest. Keeping in mind the suspicions of many regarding Carpenter's willingness to go outside of the law, one has to wonder about the conditions that led Dameron to assign so much of his work from this point forward to Carpenter. So we go into '57, he's on probation. He's writing charts for the Dorseys, he's writing charts likely for other people. And by the end of '57, he gets himself in trouble again. The feds bust him this time. And interestingly, along with what I say about the record of that first arrest disappearing, the federal government has no clue that he's been arrested before, so he's charged with the first offense. His sister-in-law said that he really wanted to go to the public health hospital and get the addiction off of himself. So he goes there. But before he goes there, interestingly, he has to spend a few months at Rikers. And while he's in Rikers, he writes a score for Stan Kenton. And Jerry Mulligan comes to visit him, picks up the score and forwards it to Kenton. It's on this score. It's kind of interesting. He conducts the band there, makes a couple of important friendships, one with Sam Rivers and another one with Chet Baker. Gradually, as he goes on, he gets bored with the band, but he practices piano and does things. And just before he gets out, Orrin Keepnews and Cannonball Adderley contact him, ask him to write string arrangements, string and brass arrangements for a recording with Blue Mitchell called Smooth as the Wind, which is really a Tadd Dameron album with Blue Mitchell as featured soloist. They're wonderful, wonderful arrangements. And pretty soon after that, in '61, he's out. He gets out early on Good Behavior. And he gets very active for the first year that he's out. Recording, composing, recording, so on. Dameron starts a project for Blue Note, which he abandons, but he does complete another for Riverside, The Magic Touch, his final recording under his own name. An all-star big band is assembled, and he writes arrangements for both earlier tunes and new compositions. Sadly, it is not well received at the time, but it does remain a very fine production and a record of his continual evolution as an arranger. He also scores arrangements for 2 Milt Jackson projects, one of which was lost in the vaults of Atlantic Records, but the other one is completed and is released on the Riverside label. He also writes some of the charts for a Sonny Stitt recording, a rare one for Stitt that features him with a large ensemble. As 1962 progresses, Dameron is suffering from heart disease, and while he continues to compose and arrange, there are no more commercial recordings of his work. His health continues to deteriorate over 1963, and by the middle of 1964, he is not only dealing with his heart problems, but he has developed cancer. One happy event in these last couple of years is his marriage to Mia Soper, a nurse who, by all accounts, is a true soulmate. Early in the morning of March 8, 1965, just past his 48th birthday, Tadley Ewing Dameron died in his home in the company of his wife. A few days later, March 12th, a funeral service was held at Advent Lutheran Church, which was attended by many from the New York jazz community. He is buried at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York.